The time is now for the Talk About Sports podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I am in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. A lot to react to here, so let's get into the show.
Yeah, week one is in the books, and today we're going to touch on all the injuries that happened. We're going to see who Tanner is buying and selling and stock up, stock down. We're going to take a look at any weather that could affect games on Sunday, discuss our DraftKings player of the slate, and then we're going to preview that Monday night game and then give out a free prop. But let's jump right in with our first segment. We've got the free bet of the week, and last week, you released Jaguars plus 3.5, and despite blowing a 17-7 lead, they still managed to cover. But what do you have for us this week, Tan?
This week, we're going to get a rare double primetime preview because I've got strong opinion on Chicago plus 6 on Sunday night. So last week's game, Chicago started down 17-3. Then they blocked a punt for a touchdown, forced a sack fumble, and got a pick 6, ultimately beating Tennessee 24-17. The Bears were the first team in the last 7 seasons to win a game averaging less than 3 yards per play on offense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people see that as a game that didn't deserve to win, but either way, it was good to see the first overall QB get a week 1 win.
Right, and your first point there is the main thing, right? So everyone looked at the flukiness in Chicago's win last week, and all of a sudden, Houston goes from minus 3.5 on the look ahead to almost a touchdown favorite here. And that is just too much of a move based on 1 week of action for me. I think the less discussed story is not Chicago's offensive struggles, but it's actually how great Chicago's pass defense was. They weren't just relying on takeaways. They conceded just 3 yards per pass play. Chicago cornerback Jalen Johnson allowed negative 2 yards into his coverage last week after conceding a league low 0.38 yards per cover snap last season. He's going to shut down wide receiver Nico Collins, who had 117 yards in week 1. And then Bears nickelback Kyler Gordon looks like he's stepping up from last year where he was already good. 9th in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. And he's going to limit Stephon Diggs, who had 2 touchdowns in his Texans debut.
All right, well, what'd you take away from the Texans offense in week 1?
Well, I mean, it relied a lot on late downs. Houston's offense averaged negative 0.74 EPA per dropback on early downs last week, which are more predictive going forward. CJ Stroud is not going to be able to replicate his 0.78 EPA per dropback on late downs for the rest of the season. You know, coming into the year, Houston really wanted to improve that rush offense with Bobby Slowick coming over from the San Francisco system. The Texans ranked 27th in rush success rate last year. They signed Joe Mixon in the offseason. The offensive line gets healthier. They ranked 4th in rush success rate in week 1. I think Bobby Slowick, even though, you know, they signed Stephon Diggs and they've got those 3 wide receivers, I think he wants to be run first. I mean, the Texans used 11 personnel on just 55% of week 1 snaps. That was lower than last season's rate at 61%. So, you know, if Slowick's going to want to run it, I don't think that's playing into Houston's strength. And Chicago's defense conceded just a 36% rush success rate last year. Matt Eberflus knows how to take away the run, and I think they'll be able to shut down Joe Mixon on Sunday night.
Yeah, they've got some interesting matchups there, but do you think Caleb can bounce back this week?
Yeah, I mean, it was a forgettable debut for the rookie number 1 overall pick, but we talked about this in the NFC North preview podcast back in July. Caleb's supporting cast, even if he's bad, you know, even if Caleb is the 25th best quarterback in the NFL, this offense is still going to be all right because of that supporting cast. The Bears tackles came out and were great. Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright combined to concede just 1 pressure last week, and they'll be able to contain Houston edge defenders Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, who ranked 14th and 20th last year in pass blocking or pass rushing efficiency, respectively. And then, you know, Keenan Allen didn't practice on Wednesday. I expect him to play. I do not expect Roma Dunze to play, but that's okay because Shane Waldron likes to play 12 personnel anyways to get Gerald Everett on the field. The big matchup I would like for this Bears offense in this game is DJ Moore, who was 10th in EPA per target last year, and he has a favorable matchup across from rookie cornerback Kamari Lassiter. So, I mean, we talked about the look ahead line for this game was Texans minus 3.5. I mean, it was disappointing for Chicago's offense in week one, but Chicago's defense way overperformed while Houston basically played to what the market expected to in week one. So now our model favors the Texans by 4, a little bit of a bump, a half-point bump for the Texans there. But, nothing like, the +6 that we're getting in market right now. And the model predicts a total of 46.7. So nothing on the total there.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the injury watch, and it was a busy week for injuries, but let's start with the big surprise from Monday Night Football with Christian McCaffrey being ruled out just before the game started.
Yeah, he's battling Achilles tendonitis, and he's people are saying he might suit up this week, he might not, but either way, it kind of feels like he'll be limited, which is going to be a problem in this particular game because Minnesota's defense had a league-high 56% blitz rate last year under Brian Flores. The best way to attack the Vikings' aggressive defense is with screens to the running back. But if McCaffrey's limited, that's going to be tough for them. We saw last week San Francisco's offense targeted running backs on just 14% of passes on Monday night compared to 24% of passes in 2023. So you can see how not having McCaffrey on the field limits this 49ers screen game.
Yeah, I was interested seeing Devo in the backfield. They ran some good plays with him. But let's look at that injury we saw in Brazil. I mean, Jordan Love, MCL sprain, he's reportedly out for 3 weeks, and Malik Willis is expected to start week 2.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a decent sample size on Malik Willis. He's averaging negative 0.43 EPA per play. That's last out of 71 quarterbacks with 100 dropbacks since Willis came into the NFL. Willis is leading the league in that time span with a 63% rate throwing short of the sticks. So, he's just dinking and dunking, and he doesn't have pocket presence either. He is leading the NFL since he came into the league with a career pressure to sack ratio of 32%. So if the defense is getting pressure, Malik Willis is taking the sack. We saw the look ahead line for this game was Packers minus 4.5. That means the market is implying that Jordan Love is worth at least a touchdown over Malik Willis. That's about as high as you're going to see for an adjustment for any player in the NFL. I'm not even sure you'd see the betting market move that much if Mahomes went out and Carson Wentz was starting for the Chiefs. So it's tough. We're looking at this. It's actually too low of adjustment if you think Willis is going to continue to average negative 0.43 EPA per play. He's been so bad thus far in his career.
Yeah, the Packers did trade a 7th-round pick for Willis a couple weeks ago, so they clearly see something in him that maybe no one else does. But let's shift it over. We got our next player. The Panthers lost interior defender Derek Brown, and it's likely due to a torn meniscus.
Yeah, so out for the season there. And Derek Brown's one of the best run defenders in the NFL. You saw when he was sidelined last week in New Orleans, Alvin Kamara was contacted within a yard of the line of scrimmage on just 27% of his carries. They were just opening up massive rushing lanes for Alvin Kamara once Brown was out. Brown had 50 run stops in 2023. That was 13 more than any other interior defender in the NFL. So he's one of the best run stoppers in the NFL. That's worth about 0.6 points to Carolina's defense by our metrics. Carolina's rush defense already ranked 26th in rush success rate allowed last year. So without Brown, they could really fall off a cliff, and you could already kind of hear Jim Harbaugh licking his chops going into this week because the Chargers ran it for 176 yards in Harbaugh's debut. That was 5th most in the NFL.
All right, well, the Buccaneers lost all-pro safety Antoine Winfield in week 1, as well as starting quarterback Zion McCollum, and they also lost his next 2 backups in Josh Hayes and Bryce Hall.
Yeah, so Tampa Bay's defense is going to be significantly worse than they were in January while playing Detroit in that playoff game because, remember, in the offseason, they lost edge rusher Shaquille Barrett, who led the team with 49 pressures last year, didn't re-sign him. They also lost starting linebacker Devin White this offseason, as well as starting cornerback Carlton Davis, who's now on the Lions. So he'll be playing his old team here. And then talked about those injuries that you mentioned that they lost in week one. All told, Tampa Bay's defense does not have 5 starters from the last game against the Lions to go along with those cluster effects in the secondary because the backups are also out. So this adds up to 2.6 points worse for the Buccaneers defense, according to our metrics.
Yeah, talk about a disaster there. Well, let's look at the Cowboys, and tight end Jake Ferguson is likely out with an MCL sprain.
Yeah, so Ferguson, 7th in EPA per target among tight ends last year. He's worth a half point to the Dallas offense by our numbers.
Yeah, and the Saints' top cornerback, Marshawn Lattimore, looks like he's also going to be out this week.
Yeah, and Lattimore's missed a lot of time these last couple of years. He's missed 17 games, and his backups are allowing 1.05 yards per cover snap compared to Lattimore's 0.79 yards per cover snap. So we kind of know, we have a good sample of what Lattimore is worth. And this year, Lattimore's backup is rookie Kool-Aid McKinstry. So that sets up for a good matchup for CeeDee Lamb on the outside. And also, I like when CeeDee Lamb is in the slot in this game because New Orleans nickelback Alontae Taylor surrendered 1.54 yards per cover snap in the slot last season, ranking 28th out of 29 qualifiers at the position. So it's a good matchup for CeeDee Lamb on Sunday.
Yeah, and the Jaguars cornerback Tyson Campbell will miss some time with the hamstring injury suffered in that loss to the Dolphins.
Yeah, and we saw Campbell miss time last year too, so it's kind of similar to the Marshawn Lattimore situation. We saw his backup, Monteric Brown, come in and surrender 0.7 more yards per cover snap than Campbell. Campbell is worth 0.7 points according to our metrics, and Amari Cooper, 13th in yards per route run last season, is going to torch backup Monteric Brown this week.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you buying right now, Tan?
I'm buying Tennessee's defense stock. So the Titans conceded just 2.8 yards per play last week, and most of the talk has been about, the disappointing performance from Caleb Williams, but it might just be Tennessee's defense. They completely rehauled that unit in the offseason, adding 7 new starters, spending $150 million in the process. I don't think it's crazy to think that Tennessee's defense might be around league average after the betting market priors had them rated 29th coming into the year.
Do you think they're going to be able to shut down Rodgers in this Jets offense, though?
Well, the Jets offense didn't start with Rodgers in week one. It was actually kind of a plan to establish Breece Hall and the ground game with, the 41-year-old quarterback coming back off of his Achilles. But the Jets ground game was awful behind that new offensive line, which is certainly a better pass blocking unit. The Jets had just 13 rushes for 31 yards on early downs when the game was competitive before the fourth quarter. And Tennessee's defense allowed negative 0.20 EPA per rush in week one. That was 8th best in the NFL. And then in the passing game with Rodgers, he only threw the right side of the field once on Monday night because he was trying to avoid 49ers all-pro cornerback Charvarius Ward. But Rodgers is not going to be able to play the matchups against this Titans defense because they have 2 solid cornerbacks. They have an all-pro cornerback themselves in L'Jarius Sneed, and Chidobe Awuzie, another free agency signing, conceded just 0.3 yards per cover snap in week one. That was 11th best in the league. This Titans defense did a really good job of taking away what the Bears wanted to do. Caleb Williams was only allowed to complete just 8 of his 20 passes thrown to his first read in week one. We know that's what Rodgers wants to do, right? He wants to get the ball out quickly at the third fastest time to throw in all of week one, and he averaged 8.3 yards per pass play on throws quicker than 2.5 seconds. That was 4th in league. So if Rodgers can't get the ball out fast like he wants to, he has to hold on to it. That's going to kind of spell disaster for this Jets offense.
Yeah, they're going to need Garrett Wilson to keep winning off the line and just keep feeding him the ball there. But
L'Jarius Sneed on Garrett Wilson, so
yeah,
that's
exactly.
like it's going to be tough for this Jets offense, especially if it's raining out there, like we are potentially seeing in the forecast.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious that the Jets receivers are not great after Wilson. But let's shift it over. And whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
I am selling stock down Ravens offensive line. So kind of got the disguised in week one because Lamar Jackson scrambled on 20% of his dropbacks. That was his third highest scramble rate since 2021. That is certainly not going to continue the rest of the season. The reason he was doing that is because the Ravens, really wanted to beat the Chiefs in a game that could have implications on playoff seeding down the line. But, Jackson's not going to scramble that much going forwards. In other words, the Ravens ground game is not going to be able to count on getting 122 yards from their quarterback every week this regular season. And the passing game is limited by this offensive line. Baltimore reworked this unit in the offseason, particularly on the right side with new guard Daniel Falele and or new starting guard, and then they played a rotation at right tackle because they can't even decide who's better. Patrick McCarry and Roger Rosengarten, those two combined to surrender a 12% pressure rate at right tackle, and it's going to be an absolute turnstile for Las Vegas edge defender Max Crosby, who was 6th in sacks last year. And then next to Crosby, the Raiders signed defensive tackle Christian Wilkins this offseason. Wilkins was 9th in pressures last year among interior defenders.
Yeah, if you go back and watch what Chris Jones was doing to that offensive line last week, it was insane. But let's shift it over to the weather of the week. And what are you seeing out there, Tan?
You got to keep an eye on the wind and showers in Carolina, but it honestly isn't going to affect Harbaugh's game plan too much, right? He's going to pound the rock regardless. Now, the thing I wanted to talk about this week that's kind of unique to early in the season is the Broncos typically have an increased home field advantage, here as the players are working themselves into shape in altitude. Denver is 42-9 straight up at home in the first 2 weeks since 1980.
That is insane. Well, Mike Tomlin wants to be conservative on the road, and he's perfectly content to just win games the way they did last week, and that's without scoring a touchdown. I mean, Pittsburgh has somehow won 5 games without scoring an offensive touchdown under Tomlin.
It is crazy. So, yeah, I mean, Tomlin's going to go into this Denver road environment and try and just beat the altitude by just shortening the game as much as he can, right, with running. The Steelers had a league low 37.9% pass rate in Arthur Smith's debut at offensive coordinator, and they're going to continue trying to pound the rock because Denver's rush defense is not great. They ranked 27th in rush success rate allowed last year.
All right, well, let's shift it over. We've got our DraftKings player of the slate, and who are you looking at?
I've got Jamar Chase at 7,800 this week. I think people are down on Chase because the raw yardage for Cincinnati's offense was so low last week. They only had 8 drives. 2 of the drives ended in fumbles, and 2 drop passes by Zach Moss were also drive killers. So the Bengals offense really wasn't that bad. I mean, certainly not enough to panic, right? They were 18th in success rate among week 1 offenses, lower than expected, but not a disaster.
Yeah, and the Bengals they couldn't keep the Patriots off the field. I mean, they were just running the ball down their throat, but that's something they don't really have to worry about as much this week because the Chiefs rank 3rd in neutral pass rate.
Yeah, and Cincinnati's always slow out of the gates, right? With Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor. The Bengals have averaged 0.19 EPA per play fewer in week 1 since 2021 than they do the rest of the season. So getting back to Jamar Chase, he had a career high 38% of his pass snaps from the slot last week because Tyler Boyd is out. It also looks like T. Higgins is going to be out for this game. So Chase is going to get an absolute monster workload, and he has a favorable matchup when he is lined up on the inside versus Chiefs cornerback Chamari Connor, who was a backup last season. And then in his first start this season, he surrendered 2.18 yards per route run in the slot, ranking 35th in week 1 out of 39 qualifying nickelbacks.
Yeah, people, they always overreact too much, but Jamar, especially in the slot, we talked about that in the before the season. That is key for him. But let's shift it over to our primetime preview. We've got the Falcons versus the Eagles, and everyone is starting to think the Falcons might have made the right choice by drafting a quarterback in the first round because Kirk did not look like himself at all last week.
No, he did not look comfortable in his first game coming off that torn Achilles. He had a league-high 10.7% turnover-worthy play rate. Cousins moved an average of just 3.1 yards per dropback, which is the least dropback movement he has had in any game of his career by more than a full yard. according to Next Gen Stats. Cousins could not take normal drops under center because of that Achilles, and Atlanta's offense was in the shotgun or pistol on 96% of the snaps against the Steelers. But new offensive coordinator Zach Robinson had to tell. The Falcons had no rushes when they were in the shotgun, and they had an 81% run rate when they were in the pistol.
That is just a recipe for disaster if they don't start mixing that up. I don't understand how that's even possible doing the NFL. But what are you expecting from Kirk this year?
I mean, if it's anything like week one, Kirk might be trying to play this season like a statue, like we kind of saw with Peyton Manning in his last year. Manning in 2015 averaged 6.2 yards per pass play, which was a yard per pass play worse than his career average. So if Cousins is going to be a yard per pass play worse than his career average, that put him about 5.8 yards per pass play. And this Falcons would go from being rated 14th in market priors to more like the 22nd best offense in the NFL.
Oh, that's not good. Well, let's shift it over to the Eagles offense. And what'd you take away from them in that disaster of a field game?
Well, Jalen Hurts, 7.4 yards per pass play in week one, which was more in line with 2022 than last season. But strangely, Green Bay's defense had just a 23% blitz rate, which was Hurts' kryptonite in 2023. So I expect Hurts to be blitzed more often the rest of the season, maybe even starting here on Monday night. Now, the thing that new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore did well was add motion to this Eagles offense. They had a 66% motion rate in week one, which was higher than any Eagles game in the last 3 seasons. Philadelphia had a league low 35% motion rate in 2023. So they almost doubled it last week under Kellen Moore. Hurts threw both of his touchdowns when the play featured motion and threw both of his interceptions on plays that did not have motion.
Yeah, he did a good job of letting his weapons do the dirty work last week. I mean, wide receivers A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith combined for 203 yards in Brazil, and the Eagles ran for 144 yards on the ground versus the Packers.
Yeah. I mean, Atlanta All-Pro safety Jesse Bates was in the box on 17% of his snaps under new head coach Raheem Morris, which was higher than every game last season. I mean, we kind of think about Bates as a real center field safety, but Morris had him up there closer to the line of scrimmage, and I kind of expect that to continue while they try to get out there and stop Saquon Barkley. So you look at it, our model makes Philadelphia a 5.6 point favorite with a predicted total of 45.1. So not a whole lot of value on the side or total in this game.
All right, well, we've got one more thing for you, and that is our primetime prop. And last week you gave out A.J. Brown over 70.5 receiving yards, and he cleared that easily with 119 yards. But what do you have for us this week?
I've got Drake London under 56.5 receiving yards. So Cousins was the only quarterback in week one to not attempt a pass with 20 plus air yards. And he may just be cooked in that department, at least in the first month of the season while he's trying to work back from this Achilles. Now, Cousins' main vertical threat at wide receiver is Drake London. So that's who's going to take the most hit for this lack of Cousins being able to push off on his right foot to throw deep. And even when Drake London, is in the intermediate game, he's going to be pretty well contained by Darius Slay, who conceded just 0.26 yards per cover snap last week. That was 8th best in the NFL. And, Darius Slay is a great cornerback. He's made the Pro Bowl in 6 of the last 7 seasons. So I think when Cousins is looking in that intermediate to deep range, he's not going to be looking at London. He's going to be looking at Kyle Pitts, who led his position with 11 targets, having at least 20 air yards last season.
Well, I love that pick there, but that will do it for our week 2 preview. Make sure you head over to drbobsports.com where you can see all of our free analysis for the weekend. So we'll be back next Friday to preview week 3 of the NFL. And as always, thanks for watching and make sure to like and subscribe.